Hello and welcome to Dive Into the Backlog, the video series where I share some thoughts on games I played recently, mostly as an effort to clear out my backlog. So you might be wondering what happened to this series for a year to go by with no new episodes. Trust me, I wasn't intentionally putting it off, but due to a mix of trying to keep up a bi-weekly upload schedule, working on two major series at the same time, and working a part-time job in conjunction with all of that, I've just not had the same amount of time I used to for actually playing games. Truth be told, most of my playtime this year has mostly gone into new releases and a bunch of games I happened to play during a trip to the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester for my birthday, along with gathering footage for the upcoming Explaining Yakuza 0 video. But enough with the excuses, let's just play some games and try to have a good time. So without further ado, here's episode 3, Metroid Cosmic Wrath. Let's start things off with a Metroid Zero Mission, the 2004 GBA remake of the original Metroid, a series I don't really have any prior history with. Sure, I know of the series, and had to do a fair amount of research into it as part of my old Smash Archive series, but I haven't played through any of these games before, outside of a very brief session of Metroid Dread back when that game first came out. Truth be told, I'm not even that well versed in Metroidvanias as a whole, the only other game in the genre I've played being Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So, why did I end up playing this game? Well, long story short, one of my friends suggested I try the series and pointed to Zero Mission as a good starting point, especially in comparison to the original NES game. Now right off the bat, I want to say that this game looks and sounds great for a GBA title. I've personally never really been a big fan of the system's musical output due to a lot of it sounding really compressed, effectively ruining what could have been good due to having to make it come out of the tiny speakers of a handheld from 2001. But Zero Mission is one of the elite few with soundtracks I can tolerate. The score works to highlight the oppressive and unnerving atmosphere of Brinstar whilst at the same time not falling into the trap of becoming too atmospheric to where it fades into the background and becomes unmemorable. The look of the world as well hits this nice middle ground where it perfectly relays the sense of isolation with every area feeling believably connected together whilst at the same time still feeling distinct from one another and doing an overall good job of clearly marking what is and isn't interactable. Admittedly, I did have some control issues here and there, mostly at points where the game would be confused on if I wanted to jump from or let go of a ledge, but I'm willing to give that a pass on the presumption it was more so me trying to play a game designed for a D-pad with a control stick, as otherwise Samus controls perfectly fine, with the sense of power that comes over you each time you grab a new power-up to make your life easier being incredibly satisfying, especially ones relating to maneuverability like the screw attack, or make killing things easier with the wave beam, which conversely also heightens the dread when all of those abilities are taken away for the Zero Suit stealth section that was added for the remake. So things are sounding pretty promising for an all-around stellar game. However, it's at this point that I need to address why I personally didn't really like the game, despite being able to acknowledge its incredible strengths. For starters, most of the bosses kinda suck. More specifically, the various mid-bosses in the game are all pathetically easy. They can catch you off guard on a first encounter, sure, but otherwise take almost no effort to beat beyond being able to aim at the area you're supposed to shoot them at until they die. And whilst the majority of the regular bosses overall do a much better job of providing a harder challenge without being unfair, Mother Brain just feels incredibly cheap due to all the difficulty in her fight having nothing to do with strategy or timing, and instead is entirely due to her being a projectile spammer, with O-rings, two small cannons, and eye lasers often leaving you in situations where you have no choice but to tank the damage because there's no way to actually dodge all of it. In addition, whilst the game does a generally good job of pointing you in the direction of where to go, with most of the exploration being fairly straightforward, there were a handful of times I flat out had no idea what the game wanted me to do in order to progress, mainly when concerning blocks that can only be destroyed with the speed booster, which I overall found to be one of the least interesting and most useless power-ups in the game, and one part in Kraid's Lair where you're just supposed to know that one specific pool of acid isn't real, and you can go through it just fine, the only indication as such being one barely visible enemy that's the same color as the acid. This kind of leads me into my final point, where for all the objective quality the game shows, it also helped me realize that I don't really like Metroidvanias. From what I understand, both from experience and hearing people talk about them, the main appeal of these kinds of games is their general non-linearity and how they mostly let you explore of your own volition to figure out how to progress, without ever directly telling you what to do. However, whenever I've tried to play one, what inevitably ends up happening is that I get lost, and after dozens of minutes have gone by trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go, I either get bored and just stop playing, or give in and look up a walkthrough to figure out what it is the game actually wants me to do in order to progress. Sure, you can argue that ruins the mystique and half the challenge, but aimlessly wandering around the same handful of hallways until I eventually find the specific block or wall the game wanted me to break so I can actually continue just makes me feel like I've wasted loads of time that I could have spent doing something else or playing something that actually gives me some level of fulfillment. More power to you if this is the kind of thing you're into, but this is just not my thing. How the same friend who recommended this game to me even told me that Metroid is basically the only Metroidvania they actually like. So I at least have some feeling I'm not alone in this. Overall, Metroid Zero Mission ended up being a game where I ended up more so respecting it than actually liking it. Whilst I can recognize it is an objectively quality game, it's also one whose enjoyment is greatly hampered for me due to it being in a genre I just can't get behind. I definitely recommend people watching this video try it out, especially if you are a Metroidvania fan, but for me personally, I don't really think there's much of a chance of me playing any of Samus's other adventures anytime soon. Next up, we have Marvel Cosmic Invasion, a retro throwback beat-em-up developed by Tribute Games and published by Dotemu, the same team-up that resulted in 2023's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. Now, this is one I was mostly going into blind from almost every conceivable angle. I've only played 2 retro beat-em-ups before with Streets of Kamurocho and the Simpsons arcade game. I never played Shredder's Revenge due to the fact I have no real history with the Ninja Turtles, barring some very vague memories of random episodes of the 2003 show. And whilst I do have some knowledge of Marvel, mainly through the LEGO games, Marvel vs. Capcom, and seeing a handful of the MCU's output, I've never read any of the comics, let alone the crossover storyline Annihilation that this game's plot is loosely based on. Long story short, this was basically something I picked up purely based on past positive experience with Marvel games, and because I thought the box art was cool. For the basic fundamentals of fighting, it's pretty much your standard affair. You've got a button for a basic combo that can also be held for a charged attack, a special attack button which is usually either a projectile or grapple, there's a meter you can build up for an ultimate attack, there's a button to block or dodge depending on the character, you can switch between 2 heroes and perform tag moves, certain characters can fly by pressing the jump button twice, and heroes can be leveled up giving them various stat boosts and eventually unlocking passive skills, which can range from faster health regeneration to instantly restocking projectiles by dodging. Overall, it makes for a system which, whilst it can get slightly repetitive after a while, does allow a decent amount of experimentation in terms of finding strong pairings and whose toolkit works best for your playstyle. The lineup of heroes on offer being a solid mix of the big name mainstays like Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Captain America, along with a handful of more relatively obscure choices like Beta Ray Bill, Cosmic Ghost Rider, and Phyla Vel. All of the characters and worlds are presented with some absolutely stellar sprite art, along with a very solid soundtrack courtesy of T-Lopes of Sonic Mania fame, which ended up reminding me a lot of the older Capcom fighters, particularly 95's Marvel superheroes. In addition to the main campaign, there's also a more traditional arcade mode which gives you a limited number of lives, with each level also offering some form of replay value with the Cosmic Cubes, these being collectibles which can be used to unlock additional alternate colors, modifiers for the arcade mode, and entries for an in-game data log, with each stage having 3 challenges that are typically either avoiding a certain obstacle, performing a certain maneuver, or defeating bosses with a specific character, along with one that's just hidden within the level. Really, my only complaint with the game, other than the typical problem of beat-em-ups tending to get pretty repetitive after a while, is that it's surprisingly short and pretty easy. A total newbie like me only getting 3 game overs across my whole playthrough, and even then I still beat the campaign in about 2.5 hours. Though I can acknowledge that a lot of the game's value is dependent on doing multiple playthroughs, not only to get better, but to also collect all of the cosmic cubes. In fact, the stuff on offer only seems to be growing, as in addition to a DLC released in May that added 2 more playable characters with Cyclops and the Thing, some more characters and an additional game mode are currently scheduled to be added to the game in autumn. When looking at the full picture, Cosmic Invasion is a very solid game, though whether it's a great game that's worth your money, especially since brand new this thing is usually asking for £35, it's going to be very dependent on 3 specific factors. Do you already like Marvel and or retro beat-em-ups? Is this the kind of game you can see yourself constantly replaying? And can you get friends together for a multiplayer session? If the fan service doesn't appeal to you, or this just isn't your kind of game, then yeah, you're probably not gonna get much mileage out of it. But if you can check off at least most of those boxes, then I definitely recommend picking up a copy, as despite that relatively high asking price for what you get, it does regularly go on sale for just £25, sometimes even cheaper on platforms like Steam. I can't say that it's the best game to come from the comic giant, but it can definitely fulfill the craving for a good beat-em-up, or just some Marvel fan service if Rivals or Tokon just isn't your thing. To end things off today, we'll be looking at 2012's Asura's Wrath, the cinematic action game published by Capcom and developed by CyberConnect 2, the same studio behind the Dot Hack series and various licensed anime fighting games. Now, before sitting down to play the game, I didn't really know what I was getting into. The only things I knew about it beforehand being the controversy surrounding the decision to sell the last 4 chapters of the story as paid DLC, which has been widely mocked as one of the worst DLC releases of all time, and the now over decade-old video by Maximilian Dude where he attempted to beat the Lost episodes on the hardest difficulty, which consists of non-canon fights against Street Fighters Ryu and Akuma. Otherwise, I didn't really know anything about the story, what you actually do for most of the game, or really anything beyond one distinct thought: this looks really cool. Lo and behold, years down the line, my local retro game store would end up having a copy of the game on PS3, so I bought it and let it sit on the shelf. Until a few months back when Sony announced they were shutting down the PS3's online store, which in conjunction with inspiring a video I did on bad DLC, led me to finally play the game just to see what all the fuss was about. Now, describing what makes Asura's Wrath good is kind of complicated, because if you were to isolate its actual gameplay and talk about it divorced from any context, it doesn't sound like anything special. For most of the game, you're effectively switching between 3 styles of play. First is a character action game which has you fight either waves of enemies or a boss, with a fairly standard moveset of punches, a heavy attack that has a cooldown bar, a projectile which you can better aim by stopping in place, a meter that you can build up for a hyper mode where you can non-stop spam heavy attacks and get an overall damage boost, and finally a burst meter which you need to build up in order to initiate a cinematic finisher so you can end the fight or move on to the next phase. Altogether, something that's serviceable and flashy, but doesn't have the mechanical depth of something like DMC or Bayonetta. Sandwiched between these two are on-rail shooter sections, in which you can either mash to shoot where you're aiming, or hit multiple targets after highlighting them with the cursor, as well as cinematic sequences filled with QuickTime events, which are usually either just for points towards your rank at the end of a chapter, or help you avoid taking damage before the start of a fight. When described in that fashion, it sounds like this is one of those titles that put all of its stock into the incredible animation at the cost of lackluster gameplay, which I can imagine is probably one of the main reasons why Capcom had such a hard time actually trying to advertise of the game, leading to its eventual financial failure. However, when these various elements come together, it becomes quickly apparent that Asura's Wrath is very much an example of something being greater than the sum of its parts, as in addition to the animation and sound doing wonders to showcase just how powerful these characters are, the QTEs are always used to perfectly accentuate the impact of every motion they're tied to, giving feelable weight to every punch, every motion, and every struggle Asura goes through on his quest for revenge, with each battle only making him more angry and further enhancing the scale at which battles take place, in turn giving context through gameplay as to how powerful his former comrades must be if they're perceived as more of a threat than what he faced before, with probably my favorite example of the game utilizing its presentation to accentuate these themes being just the general idea that the button to skip hearing a boss give exposition is also the one that makes Asura punch them in the face to make them shut up. If you're noticing that I'm being fairly vague with discussing the specifics of what this game does right and wrong, that's not just because Asura's Wrath offers an experience that's truly kind of unique to most other games of its genre, but it's also because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't played the game for themselves, as this is something I not only recommend you play, I want people to go in blind with no expectations, so it can hopefully take you on the same kind of ride it took me for. In fact, just to get it out of the way, outside of the real ending being DLC, which if you can put the dirty practice aside houses some of the best moments in the entire game, my only real complaint is some performance issues during more intense sections, namely some frame drops and screen tearing, though from what I've heard, most of these issues are mainly prominent in the PS3 version, with the 360 ports not only generally running better, but that version, as well as the DLC for it, have been preserved after it was made backwards compatible for both Xbox One and Series systems. Other than that, this was a near-perfect masterpiece for me, in which you can feel the love, care, and unabashed conviction that went into every frame. When we live in an era where narrative-focused games seem to be consistently under scrutiny for feeling more like failed movie and book pitches that occasionally remember to have a superfluous interactive element, Asura's Wrath is a testament to how a video game can use interactivity to heighten the emotion of a story, and truly get invested in an artist's work. It's not a game for everyone, and I can't guarantee you'll feel the same way about it that I did, but I still wholeheartedly recommend you try it out for yourself. I went in with no expectations, and left with a title I can easily consider one of the best games I've ever played. And with that, we've concluded another dive. Hopefully I should be able to get these out more consistently in the future, as I've found these to be a good outlet to express some of my views on games I do or don't like, and can act as a nice breather between the research-heavy output I usually make. If you want to suggest anything I should play in the future, linked in the description is my Backlog page, which features all the games I currently own but haven't played yet. Though keep in mind that the longer the game, the longer it will take me to finish and make something out of it. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.